We're going to show you why there's no good to that system. Why the system is destructive to the very idea of morality. Secondly, we say the proposition assumption, and this is the only time in which I've mentioned that ridiculous baby machine analogy, assumes that giving to charity will disable that machine. We say, ladies and gentlemen, we would rather have a couple of babies drown in order to fix the fundamental structural inequalities that exist within African states and the international situation, and there is a choice there. There is a choice about resources. We say at the moment, when all of you give to charity, you prop up corrupt regimes, you prop up the current situation, and you make those people's lives much worse. You make them more likely to starve and die. And that's the burden we set ourselves. There's one quick thing that we're going to polish off from art, and this is about intention. Right? When I intend to go out and buy a Louis Vuitton handbag, I'm sort of deliberately in some way knowing that I'm going to actually lead to the death of a starving child. There are loads of reasons why buying a handbag is great. So girls and some boys, you'll have a great one with this one. We say, when you buy a Louis Vuitton handbag, you buy it because someone in the developing world has sewn the bloody bag, right? It's providing a job for them. And it's not only providing a job for them, it's providing an entire infrastructure which employs people within their communities, which gives them jobs, which ensures that people want to invest in those countries. But also, it gives a direct and indelible link that's actually self-interested between the developing world and the developing world. That's the route by which we actually feed people. That's the route by which we give them long-term and sustainable ability to better themselves. No, thank you. Firstly, we need to work out whether there is any good to the moral system created. First problem, acts-omissions distinction. Events still take place even if I don't act, right? People will still starve. And we're not just going to assert that, we're going to give you 4 reasons why in this case those events still happen. Firstly, the nature of the neo-patrimonial state in Africa, which I'm going to explain in a minute. Secondly, endemic corruption within those states. Thirdly, the nature of the international institutions, which no matter how much Oxfam wants to try and change things, will never be able to change. Fourthly, luck. We say most African states are actually doing quite well until the 1973 oil price shocks. They're all things for which we can never assume that individual consumers in this state at the moment have had any responsibility for. And they are the structural reasons why people are starving in Africa at the moment. Thirdly, though, and perhaps most important, secondly, though, it removes the spectrum upon which we operate morally. We say no one will ever do this particular thing. No one's got enough capacity to take on board this action. And we say moral systems have to create spectrums by which you can aspire to be more or less moral. What this does is it creates an absolute line. It says effectively that all of you are intensely immoral. So why bother being better? Why bother operating on another end of that spectrum? Why not go out and sexually abuse children if that helps you out? That white spectrum can sit down and piss off, you drunk twat. Moral relevance. It says there's nothing they can do about their situation. That it's the whole fault that Andrew Fitch wears a designer shirt, or now as a teacher, probably not a designer one, that they are starving. And that removes their ability and their conception as human agents, as human beings, as people capable of human thought. And that's outrageous. So, second major point, no thank you. It's important to discuss whether charity works. Because saying not performing an act makes the situation worse. If we can show you that performing that act makes the situation worse, then we win, right? That's another way under which we win. We say firstly it's bad to give charity under any circumstances when that charity is given to states. Why is that true? Firstly, it's about corruption. It is a fact that African states are endemically corrupt. There are structural and historical reasons for this. Firstly, these states were established in the 1880s and 1890s primarily to extract wealth from the centre and resources from the centre and to get them out as quickly as possible. That's why railways haven't been built for 90 years in Africa. That's why they go from rubber out to the coast as quickly as possible. Why is that a problem? We say this was the state that was inherited in the post-colonial period. It was the state that was inherited by elites in Africa, and they used those mechanisms of wealth extraction in order to extract as much stuff as possible. Why is that bad? Well, it's the basis for their power. They know that they have to undermine this particular, they have to extract as much stuff as possible to stay in power. So when we give charities to states, we pump these corrupt governments with blood which prolongs their power. We reduce the likelihood that these states will fail. We reduce the likelihood that opposition movements will come up and challenge their ability to distribute resources, and challenge their legitimacy, and challenge their ability to govern properly and to provide long-term food. No, thank you. Secondly, we say, giving to charity makes these governments stronger in relation to other domestic political actors, because it gives government structures, it gives them infrastructure, it gives them police forces and education forces in order to enhance their domination via their own elite networks, via their own ethnic groups. No, thank you. Secondly, it gives them handouts to give out to other people. These are the things which means that African states don't help those who are on the borderline of poverty, because they don't care about it, because they are structurally there and they exist only to perpetuate the rule of a small ethnic elite. That's why people starve. That's the reason. And giving to Oxfam every month, as much as it's a bit of a moral indulgence upon all of your part, doesn't actually solve the problem. Tell me how it might. Sure.
What bollocks? This simply makes the case of giving money to direct charities or to other groups and not directly to state. Our moral responsibility stays the same.
That's rubbish. On an entire proposition case why giving to charity is going to remove those problems, and I'm just about to show you why giving it through NGOs is even worse. It's worse for three reasons. Firstly, it means that charity becomes the only game in town with regard to power in these countries. It forces out innovation and attempts to alleviate those own problems by states becoming dependent upon it. And they're dependent upon it both because of their historical and economic and sort of political legacy that they've been left by the West, but they're also dependent because it's the only thing that seems to keep them in power in the short term. More than that, though, it means they're actually quite weak vis-a-vis international institutions. So even if we were to get an amazing government that wanted to feed its starving populations, we wouldn't be able to do it because they become dependent on that charitable expertise, because they are seen internationally as being dependent upon that aid and that advice. So that means that every time you give to Oxfam, every time you give to a direct NGO, you perpetuate international inequality. So, for the controversial reason that at the moment, if you give charity to an African state, if you give it to an NGO, you are actually making people starve, and because we remove the ability to have a spectrum and moral framework, we beg to oppose this motion.